Right. This is a talk. I'm going to give a talk now, record a talk now, which I gave just yesterday. I think yesterday, yes, to a club of people called Mykonos. And I'm not going to waste time by explaining what Mykonos is now. But I should say that it's a group of mostly lawyers and some prison directors, some social scientists, a number of people interested in miscarriages of justice in the Netherlands. And they invited me to give a talk, and I offered to give a talk about comparing the case of Lucia de Berk in the Netherlands some years ago and Lucy Letby in Great Britain now. Now, the Dutch audience on the whole knew everything or knew a great deal about the Lucia de Berk case. I didn't have to explain much about that. They mainly knew next to nothing about the Lucy Letby case. So in my talk, I mainly explained the Lucy Letby case and pointing out similarities. Well, I think it's best if I just get started and move on to after quickly seeing the first slide. There you see Lucy Letby, the mugshot from the police, and there you see Lucia de Berk, and that was actually a photograph I took with my iPhone back then in 2009, and she'd been originally first arrested in 2001 and convicted, etc., etc., etc. I mean, police investigation, trials, conviction, full life. And then from 2005, the fight to get her a retrial. And so at this moment in 2009, when I visited her, I now recall, I mean, I'd forgotten when I'd visited her, but on the photograph information, it says it was in 2009. So that means that she must have been out of jail but on bail, awaiting a retrial planned to take place starting towards the end of that year and concluding in the beginning of 2010 with her complete exoneration. And as you see, she's a lovely lady. She's looking very beautifully at us there, and she has a lot of hope because things have made a big turn for the good. Okay, let's just get started and see what happens. And some of the slides I will be able to deal with faster because I'm thinking that most people watching this are familiar with Lucy Letby to some extent, or know quite a bit about it. Not so much about Lucia de Berk, but the slides are mostly about Lucy Letby case. So you don't need to know much about the Lucia de Berk case. I will keep pointing out things which are the same, basically. Now, I'm not quite sure. So this is the second slide. I'm not quite sure if this is something which is the same in some sense. I think it is the same in some sense. And what I'm showing you here is a collection of program booklets of an amateur orchestra. And the orchestra was composed of people who had formerly been students at the University of Amsterdam and were now members of the elite, the creme de la creme, and of course very good musicians, amateur musicians in The Hague. And they were gathering for rehearsals of their next concert. They gave 1 or 2 concerts a year, classical music concerts. And this was going on during the trials of Lucia de Berk. So in particular, around 2003, 2004, there were 2 trials, first at the lower court, and then there was an appeal, and then at the higher court. And that was the main part of the legal proceedings against Lucia de Berk. Now, interestingly, a number of the members, certainly one of the members of that orchestra, played a very, very great big role in the Lucia de Berk case, and other members of the orchestra were important people in the elite of The Hague, and that included a senior editor of the quality newspaper, NRC, a senior politician of the party then in power, and the public prosecutor during one of Lucia's 2 trials. And why do I have these books? Well, they were given to me, these booklets were given, and in the booklets you see the list of the names of the members of the orchestra, so you can, the things I'm about to claim can be checked. I mean, things I just said can be checked, and one can look up the exact names of those people and maybe discover some more notable persons joining together in, like for weekly rehearsals for the next concert, during which they would not only practice the music they were going to play, but they would also gossip and chat, and there would be a break and so on. And I have these booklets because a colleague of mine, I was then in Utrecht, University of Utrecht, a colleague of mine in Utrecht had a cousin who was a member of the orchestra. And that person is also listed in the program booklet. And at one particular rehearsal, that cousin of my friend was utterly shocked to hear, well, first of all, various people sort of commiserating with the chief pediatrician of the Juliana Children's Hospital. That was the hospital where Lucia de Berk was working, and the whole trial of Lucia de Berk and the whole case against her consisted for a very large part of medical notes concerning deaths and collapses of children at the Children's Hospital, where Lucia de Berk had been present, and those events had, at the time, if they were deaths, had been, there'd been autopsies and so on, and they were natural deaths. But in the trial, as a result of the trial, several trials, they were converted into murders. Murders using various techniques, which had simply not been noticed by the coroner earlier. Everybody was, of course, very sympathetic to the chief pediatrician at whose hospital these terrible things had happened, which was having a terrible toll on her, of course, emotionally. Naturally, especially as a number of the children were her very own patients she was directly involved in the medical care of. And at one rehearsal, as I was about to say, my friend's cousin heard the public prosecutor at the trial saying to the main medical witness at the trial, and also the person in charge of the medical treatment of the children allegedly murdered or attacked by Lucia, the public prosecutor said to the pediatrician, the consultant, the chief top pediatrician, "Oh, don't worry, child, the witch is going to hang." Well, I suppose most of the people who were there felt exactly the same, and they were very glad that this was likely to happen. But my friend's cousin was quite simply shocked. And later, so towards 2007, 2008, when I was getting publicity by being one of the people speaking out for a fair retrial for Lucia, that cousin of my friend gave these booklets to their cousin, who gave them to me so that I could, because I could perhaps make use of them. I haven't made much use of them. I've told the story to a few Dutch journalists, but nobody wants to write about these things. And I made, at the end of the talk, say a little bit more about how important this orchestra was in some other respects. Now, I want to say straight away, I'm not saying, and I don't want to imply that, I don't want to suggest that there was some kind of conspiracy right? I'm not saying there's a conspiracy. All of the persons sort of named, not named, but who can be identified from what I say about them on the right-hand side, all of those persons were sympathetic to the pediatrician at whose hospital such terrible things had happened. They were deeply sympathetic. They were friendly, and they commiserated. And if they could help, they helped. And everybody was, all of them, including the pediatrician. She was making mistakes, by the way, and I could tell you some more things later, at the end, perhaps. There was there was no conspiracy. These are just people who are touched by terrible events going on and anxious to help one another, and doing that from the very best of motives. From the very best of motives. I mean, the public prosecutor is prosecuting what appears to be appalling serial killer, just like Lucy Letby. Okay, let's move on from that. And the next slide quickly shows, well, it's actually a shorter version of the abstract of my talk, summary of my talk. And basically, this is just a list of a couple of the things I want to talk about, and that I will talk about them sort of mixed up with some kind of account of the trials of Lucy Letby, and also what happened leading up to the trials. So one thing I want to talk about is the fact that what makes these two cases actually so incredibly similar is that they are both modern versions of a witch hunt, police investigation, and the earlier investigations and suspicions in the hospital. Altogether, that formed what in past centuries could have been a witch trial, a witch hunt, succeeded by a witch trial. And okay, so I try to explain that, basically expounding some recent work by Peter Hayes. He's actually a politicologist, was, I suppose, associate professor or something like that. I forget which university in England, who's recently written about this and made a beautiful YouTube video of a talk about this too. So I'm just going to show you some snippets from his work. So not only are there incredible similarities between the two cases, but in some sense that's not surprising at all, because they are both reenactments of classic witch hunt and everything that goes around leading up to a witch hunt and following a witch hunt. I want to point out some things which I think seem to demonstrate serious failings in the criminal prosecution system in the United Kingdom. And somewhat grandly, I say this is a failed implementation of trias politica, the separation of the powers. Right? You have the judiciary, you have the you have the people who make the laws in the UK Parliament. Laws are passed by Parliament, right? Are proposed by the government, perhaps passed by the Parliament, and then they become law. And the judiciary is independent of the people who create the laws, and the people who create the laws are independent of the judiciary, and those two are independent of the people who carry out the dirty work, namely the police. Right? Now I'm briefly, I'm blanking on the proper formal terms for the three branches of the state. And of course, at the top there's a president or a prime minister or a king or something, but the three parts of the state are supposed to be independent of one another. And they each have definite tasks to carry out, and it's very important that they do these tasks independently of one another. Now, I think that in the UK, that separation of the powers, a really important contribution from the Enlightenment, has, of course, the Enlightenment ideas did touch Great Britain, and the philosophical ideas of the Enlightenment became also part of British history of thought and culture. But I'm going to say that trias politica did not get implemented optimally, and that is, you can see some of the consequences of that in the Lucy Letby case. So that is naturally, I'm suggesting a difference with Lucia de Berk, the Netherlands case, because in the Netherlands there was a constitution. I mean, there have been wars and revolutions and complete refounding of the state a number of times. There have been Napoleon took over, and later Hitler took over, and so from time to time the systems of the state need to be restored or rebuilt, and in particular in the 19th century, as a result of various political developments, very highly intelligent, learned, and knowledgeable, and I think decent people wrote a constitution for the Netherlands and wrote the law book, and later the Parliament has added laws to the law book. And they certainly implemented a very, very, in a very solid way, trias politica. Not only that, as I'll mention in a moment, some further aspects of, one could say, the continental systems, which kind of were at least the bonus of Napoleon. Okay, then there's going to be the role of the media, and that was quite pretty important in the Lucia de Berk case, and even more so in the Lucy Letby case. And I'm going to rant a little bit about experts in criminal psychology, forensic psychologists, criminologists who study criminologists. As a criminologist told me, we study criminals. And who are criminals? Well, those are people who are convicted of crimes. Now, sorry, there are also criminals who don't get convicted. There are people who got convicted of crimes who are actually innocent. No. This was a professor of criminology in Great Britain, actually. Two professors, actually. And no. Criminologists study the criminal population, as defined as the people in prison, and people who earlier have been executed for crimes. The convicts. These are experts in convicts. And there is a lot of them working on healthcare serial killers. Well, serial killers to begin with, understanding the mind of the serial killer. That's quite a big business, because the media is very interested in that. The public is very interested in that. That's connected to the enormous interest in so-called true crime. Now, true crime is fine if there really are crimes, and it's very interesting. And some people working on the popular side of true crime do very beautiful work, and seem to be saying interesting things about the character, personality, trying to understand the minds of serial killers. But what about a serial killer who's not a serial killer? Right? They're in jail for being a serial killer, but actually they're innocent. And yet those same experts will go on TV and explain to the public, who's so anxious and desperate and eager to know what it was in Lucy Letby's past which made her what she became. Well, you can ask that question, of course, but they are interested in what made her become a serial killer of babies, of all things. And it's a stupid question if that's not the case. It's a bit like the Thirlwall inquiry, which is investigating this, trying to answer a stupid question, and is going to make recommendations to government and hospitals and so on, how to stop future serial killers from killing. And okay, fair enough, but the stupid thing, this recommendation is going to be based on the experience of a non-serial killer who was stopped, but perhaps too late. I mean, yeah. Okay, now let me get on. What are the main similarities in the two cases? And they're basically, I see a sort of triad of things, though one of them has like two parts. There is an inexplicable surge in deaths at the hospital, in a particular unit of a hospital. There's a spike, or a cluster, an unexplained cluster, unexpected, unpredicted cluster, a surprising cluster, and at the same time, a particular healthcare professional has been associated with the cluster, becomes associated with the cluster, with the spike. They are always there when the deaths happen, or the unexplained, unpredicted, unexpected collapses. Right? That's one thing. The surge in basically it's statistical. These are two sides of the statistics. There are more deaths than usual, and the particular nurse is always there. Apparently, it seems. That's one thing the two cases definitely have in common. They have in common that there are strange diary writings, or there's the post-it notes, and there are strange, anyway, there are strange, let's say, private writings, which are interpreted by police and prosecutors as confessions. They were definitely, in the Lucy Letby case, they were definitely formally by the judges interpreted as confessions. She wrote some very odd things about herself, Lucia. In Holland, in England, Lucy Letby, it's not absolutely clear to me that the prosecution saw the green post-it note as a confession, and of course we know there are lots of reasons why they shouldn't have done, because the same post-it note says she didn't do it. Why me, and I'm innocent, and what how did this happen to me? But as well as I did this, right? Oh, I'm evil, and I'm evil. Well, Lucia wrote something like that, I do these bad things. The jury certainly saw that as a confession, I'm sure. Well, I'm okay, I can't say certainly, but I expect, and one of the reasons I expect that is because journalists interpret it that way, and members of the parliament, of the public whom one speaks to, or one talks to on social media, frequently refer to the green post-it note as a confession. They say, yeah, but she did it. She said she did it. So what are you talking about? I mean, stop it. She confessed. The public believes she confessed, or part of the public. The public believes that she's a serial killer, as far as they believe it, or has come to believe it. Different persons, primarily on different grounds. There's the post-it note. There's the statistics. And there's a smoking gun, a forensic smoking gun. And that's the insulin attacks, the immunoassay insulin concentrations and C-peptide stuff in the Lucy Letby case. Well, it's actually two babies, but I think of insulin as being one smoking gun. Insulin attacks. And in the Lucia de Berk case, there was digoxin. There was some toxicological evidence which could be interpreted as saying that baby Amber, it's kind of the baby A for Lucia de Berk, but it's the chronologically the last case. It's actually the trigger to the event which sent people to sent first a nurse to a head nurse, and then a head nurse to management, and then management to the police. With the support of the chief pediatrician, so with the support of a consultant, you could say. Though she was fully employed and was the clinical director of the hospital. Lucia de Berk case. So there's that. All right. So that's basically three things which keep coming up, and different people tend to focus on different ones. Different people who believe that Lucy Letby is guilty will home in on different ones of those three. And in Lucia de Berk, it was the same. There was the three kinds of things, and different people were convinced by different things. Now, the further similarity between the two cases, and this is similar to witch hunts, of course, is nobody ever saw Lucy Letby doing anything wrong. There's no direct proof, well, as far as proof is ever direct, but there's no, for instance, look at the insulin. There's no proof that the babies were given insulin. There is a measurement, a clinical test, which suggests, one of whose interpretations is that maybe this baby has been given insulin which they were not supposed to have been given. I mean, they could still have been given it by mistake, or there could have been an error in the measurement process, and those errors are actually much more prevalent than many people think. Yeah. But okay, so there is some evidence which may suggest to some people, and together with further evidence could be was argued to prove that Lucia de Berk had poisoned baby Amber with digoxin, and that Lucy Letby had attacked babies FNL, if I remember correctly, by somehow getting insulin into them. Not really clear how, by putting insulin into feeding bags, but then, the insulin bags were somewhere else, so on and so forth. So there's the whole story, the proof that babies were attacked with insulin by Lucy. There is none, of course. There's an argument that she did it based on a whole collection of ingredients, including one piece of medical, clinical, toxicological evidence, some blood readings of substances in blood. Right, so Lucia de Berk and Lucy Letby, in both cases, nobody ever saw the person harming patients. There are no fingerprints showing that they tampered with medical apparatus. There's no DNA, no closed circuit TV film showing something really bad being done by somebody who's clearly that particular nurse. All the deaths were at the time natural deaths. And in most cases there have been autopsies and what do you call them? Well, the investigations as to what was the cause of death had concluded natural death in all the deaths. There were events which were seen, like collapses, for instance, resuscitations. I mean, collapses necessitating resuscitation, but not fatal at that moment. Or other incidents, very vague word, incident. What is an incident? There were incidents which were thought during and were argued at the trials to be surprising, unexpected, inexplicable. But on further investigation, apparently are none of those things. If they were unexpected, that was because there were not enough. In the Lucy Letby case, that was probably because there were not enough nurses to be closely enough observing incredibly ill babies who would be likely to and did actually collapse without warning frequently. And the reasons they did were not apparent at the time, but in retrospect they can be one can find extremely plausible innocent explanations. So what else is there in terms of similarities? There is both of the cases, by the very absence of hard evidence, there is a mountain of soft evidence, of little observations of things people said or did at particular moments, which are given a very sinister explanation by the prosecution, who of course know that the person in question is guilty. So there are little things they say which are used as arguments for that they are liars. There are things they took home which they should not have taken home, which are actually not terribly important things, and not. Those can be argued to be utterly innocent and even sensible from a nursing perspective. Things which people had done, nurses had done, but they can be given a sinister interpretation. Of course, the thing is that if you're trying a witch, nobody will have actually seen the witch flying on their broomstick, right? Nobody actually saw them incanting their spells. They may have seen them stirring their cauldron, or and throwing in a frog or something, and making an incantation. But nobody ever saw the witch actually doing anything to somebody. But the idea was really that they were able, through their magical powers, to cause harm to the person, even though they were far away or only in the neighborhood. And there had to be a mountain of such evidence, because just one little thing is not going to be enough to make anybody believe somebody is a witch. But when you show so many examples of this sinister trivia, which can be thought of as sinister, and you make a mountain out of it, then you can convince gullible people. And the other thing two cases have in common is the enormous media attention the cases obtained. And of course, major witch trials in the 17th century, 16th century were also major events in towns and villages and in countries. And there was not social media yet, but these were things which were talked about and remembered for years and written about. And people are fascinated by crime, right? And they're fascinated by murder. People are horrified by murder of babies, children. So Of course, this is how you sell newspapers. Right. Now, just some differences. The Netherlands has a so-called inquisitorial system, continental system. The trial is run by a board of 3 judges who perform an investigation. They are the fact finders. And they are running the show. They are calling witnesses. In Great Britain, you have an adversarial system where there are 2 sides. There's the person there's the accused, and there's the state, the king. Rex versus, or Regina Rex versus Lucy Letby. It's the king against one of their citizens, one of their subjects, I should say, even, right? In the UK, you have a king and you have subjects. The king has subjects. So it's the king versus one of his subjects. But okay, the king obviously is not going to come down to the court and argue to in front of a judge. The subject is going to need to be represented by somebody who understands the law and is able to talk educated and posh. And so you have 2 barristers, and it becomes a kind of show, a wrestling match. It's seen as a sort of wrestling match, and you have supporters of the 2 sides cheering, their champion, whether it's the prosecuting KC or the defending KC. They are both king's counsels, which means they are persons who are allowed to step over the bar which separates the hoi polloi from the really important people, and they can discuss things even in private with the judge, because you have a judge who in the UK system is supposed to be kind of adjudicator. Who is sort of running the show, but they're supposed to be an independent, neutral. I suppose they're supposed to be an independent, neutral, and wise person who is sort of running the show. But it's the 2 sides, each with their own teams of lawyers and paralegals and experts and witnesses, each side being represented by 1 barrister, 1 KC, not just a barrister, but a KC. They are fighting one another and trying to discredit the evidence and the witnesses brought by the other side, which they typically like to do by destroying their character in some way or another, bringing in doubt as to their integrity or authority if they're so-called scientific experts or expert witnesses. If it's the prosecution lawyers trying to destroy the character of the defendant. The point of the prosecution is that person is an evil person. So you want to make sure that the people who actually decide, who are the jury, that they are convinced that this is an evil person. How do you convince ordinary folk, 12 ordinary citizens, subjects, fellow citizens, that somebody has done terrible crimes? Well, one thing you certainly got to do is to show that they are a very, very bad person. And there are many ways to do that independently of actually showing that they actually did what they're supposed to have done. Of course, if they did do what they're supposed to have done, they must be bad persons. But the whole point of the jury is that it's ordinary people who, after sitting there, seeing the evidence and observing the body language and the reactions and the answers of the person on trial. Actually, the person is not on trial, it's the evidence which is on trial, but still the person is alleged to have done some terrible things, and the jury is going to decide whether they did it or not. And the consequence will be punishment, and the judge will say, given the crime, what the punishment has to be. The jury don't decide the punishment, but of course they know that if it's murder, then there's going to be a life sentence or whatever. Various kinds of ways of killing people and murdering people of more and less seriousness. So you have two very different systems anyway, and I to be honest, I don't think the difference between the two systems makes such a big difference in the case where there was no crime, but there is alleged to be a horrific, horrible, awful crime, and where the defendant pleads innocent, which sort of necessarily means that there can't be direct evidence that they're guilty. Of course, all evidence is indirect in some sense. Eyewitness, you still have to trust the eyewitness, and you have to trust their memory, right, and their observation powers. So, what the eyewitness says they saw is the evidence, but but one has to have supporting evidence to make you believe that what they say they saw, they really did see. They really did see. And moreover, you may have to interpret what they saw, because if you see somebody hitting somebody else, that could be in a different, depending on the context, all kinds of different things, and sometimes not even crime. Of course, it could be self-defense, right? And I think the difference in the systems pales into insignificance in the situation when actually there was no crime at all, but the alleged crime is horrific. The evidence is highly technical, complex, scientific, you could say, specialistic, requiring advanced education and knowledge to be able to understand. And on top of that, and in some sense, in order to compensate for its absence, a host of trivia, little things taken in the context of the accusation are very sinister, but which taken in the context of the claim of innocence could be totally innocent. I mean, and could even be evidence for innocence, right? The same evidence, the same remark somebody made, the same odd thing they did, could be seen as a sign of guilt if you believe the person is guilty, and a sign of innocence if you think they're innocent. So it can be used by both sides as evidence for their claim, right? So it's yes. So the adversarial versus inquisitorial is not, in my opinion, an important difference. But a jury of fellow citizens versus a board of wise, educated judges, right? That's a little bit different. There's a correlation between adversarial systems mostly have juries, and inquisitorial systems sometimes don't, or often don't. But it seems to me that 12 fellow citizens are equally susceptible to emotion, actually, as 3 educated judges, 3 professional judges. The 3 judges come from a completely different layer of population from the person who's, in these cases, from the person who's being prosecuted, whose crimes are being prosecuted. So, in some sense, the jury of fellow citizens, I would prefer that. I mean, I would, I wouldn't be happy if I got convicted of something I had not done, but I would like it that there were ordinary people like me who had something to say about whether or not I got convicted of something. So I believe that 3 judges can be just as emotional and swayed as much by emotion, especially in cases like this. Those 3 wise, educated judges, they have got to trust medical experts, and they may not be very good at discerning which experts are good experts and which ones are not good experts. That's a very important thing. They may not appreciate various subtleties of complex medical evidence, and of course they should be intelligent enough to have some understanding, but but judges by definition are people who work with words and with rules. They don't do science, they don't do maths, they don't do statistics. They're kind of just, they 3 judges. Okay, I've said it. I don't see the big difference there, really, in cases like this. Now, there's a big difference in culture and time and place. 2 different societies, moreover, 10 to 20 years difference in time, and the UK tabloid media is quite something special, and the class structure and social media are quite something these days. So those are differences, which certainly, and social media and the tabloid media in the British case certainly played an enormous role. Okay, so let's move on. Now, the next couple of slides rapidly go through the Letby case, mentioning not much of the stuff which happened in the background. So I'm just going to focus on the sort of the public and legal steps. But first of all, we have the beginning of the spike, the cluster, January 2015. Lucy Letby is fully qualified now and is as a neonatal intensive care nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital. And during the next 18 months, so from January 2015 to June 2016, there were 18 deaths in 18 months. Now that number may look, some people call it 16, and it depends on what about babies who were, say, born and cared for at the hospital and were transferred out of the hospital and died soon after. That way you get to 18 deaths in 18 months. Otherwise it's 16. And there's some more sort of marginal cases where you can quibble over definition of things. For instance, death versus stillbirth or miscarriage. Stillbirth or miscarriage, right? The official definition is that if you're born alive, then it is not a miscarriage or a stillbirth. But both a miscarriage or a stillbirth end with a not living baby or fetus. But there is a little bit of latitude in what happens in the first few minutes after birth, and so actually there's a little bit of fuzziness there. It's not significant in this case, I think. I have thought that sometimes, but I don't think so now. So in 18 months there were 18 deaths, that's 1 a month. But in the years preceding and the years after, there were typically 3 a year and sometimes less, often 2. That's one death every 4 months. It's not many. It's a it's not even a handful, 2 or 3 deaths a year. And then suddenly there's one death every month. And moreover, they come in little bursts, in clusters. In fact, they start with a cluster of 3 in June, which shocked everybody. And then there was another death. Right? 3 deaths, one after the other in rapid succession. Suddenly in June, suddenly they'd had their annual quota. So one of them saying is, by the law of averages, there should be no more. Some people would say, if you've had 3, then and 3 is the average. You expect not to have more. Right now, in this amazing number of deaths happening throughout those 18 months, though with some big gaps in them. But they were coming in kind of clusters for good reasons, for known reasons now, not quite for known reasons then. They had everybody terribly worried. The managers, the doctors, the nurses, everybody knew. People were concerned, and nobody understood them, apparently. I think certain persons should have understood them perfectly well, but they chose not to. They chose, to guess that there was a killer nurse. This meant there were terrible things going on. And clearly something has gone badly wrong. And it certainly led to, in July 2016, Lucy Letby was taken off administrative duties. The consultants wanted her out of their sight. The consultants had already, for a year, been believing and arguing to the management that Lucy was actually harming babies, that they had zero proof, just the fact that she was always there when the bad things happened. That was all they had, but they were suspicious of her. The management was not suspicious. Management looked into things, and there were various little investigations done, and there was just nothing there, and Lucy was fine. Lucy was one of the best nurses. Nobody had any problems with Lucy, except some consultants. But anyway, things came to a head, and something had to be done. Lucy Letby was transferred to administrative duties. The neonatal intensive care unit was demoted from level 2 to level 1. This has a strong effect on, there are 3 levels, level 1, level 2, level 3. And the highest level 1 can try to care for babies with more and more prematurity. So less and less born at lower and lower gestations. When you're level 1, you're not meant to be caring for babies who are very premature. A little bit, a couple of weeks, yes, maybe 3. I forget the criteria. I mean, these are NHS rules. These are official classifications. Countess of Chester neonatal unit was level 2, so they could have some difficult cases, but it was definitely not level 3. Anyway, it was lowered to level 1, which means that from that moment onwards they were not caring for such severely ill babies or such critical cases, such premature babies of such prematurity, babies of such low birth weight, so on and so forth. They did not have them anymore, and the death rate collapsed naturally, went back to normal. And they also reduced the number of beds, cots, one should say, and some other changes happened. Some other things happened which should have happened long before, obviously. They next correctly called in external experts to investigate the spike in deaths, because the spike in deaths was for real, right? 18 deaths in 18 months, when normally it's three per year or less. Is something's going on. The outside investigators actually were also told about the suspicions against the nurse, but they didn't see anything wrong with the nursing or with Lucy Letby in particular. I'm sure they heard the problems of the consultants, and the consultants were pediatricians, and this was the Royal College of Pediatricians and Child Health, and they came. Veni Vidi Vici. They wrote a report which identified a whole litany of failings in medical care and management. I won't go through them now, but they had very, very strong recommendations of things which had to be changed fast, things which had been very wrong in the past. They didn't see suspicious deaths or suspicious events. Well, they said there were some deaths that they didn't understand well, or maybe some collapses they didn't understand, which deserved further investigation. They actually criticized the hospital, and I would say, therefore, the consultants for not having investigated the medical cause of the events, which seemed to be difficult to understand. It seemingly nobody had time to investigate them. They should have. This was one of the criticisms. They didn't see suspicious deaths, but they did see that further investigation would be a good thing. They called for forensic investigation. And it should be forensic, by the way, because, of course, after up to a year has gone by, and much evidence has gone. The medical samples, biological samples, and so on. They complained that there was not enough saving of the important samples which you would need if you wanted to do a serious investigation as to what had gone wrong, and it would have to be a forensic investigation because there would be so little to go on. Still, the report came out, it got published, and that was actually the signal to two consultants to go to Cheshire Police. And I suppose they did do that under the authority of management. Management agreed they could go to the police. And of course they could have any time earlier, but they didn't. They went to the police, and one of the things they told them that there were usually 3 deaths a year, and that all deaths and collapses are usually explained. So they told the Cheshire Police that there were many, many, many more deaths than expected, and a remarkable thing about these deaths were that they were completely unexpected and impossible to understand, and of course they also told the police that a particular nurse was always there, seemed to be always there. The police investigation was announced in the newspapers. The police take on the case, and suddenly a certain Dowie Evans turns up and invites himself to become an advisor for the police investigation, a medical advisor. And he recommends to the police, probably later on, certain other persons as experts in various fields where he had less expertise, or where he felt they could not yeah, they could confirm. They had expertise which would help them to verify what he had finding. So police got to work, and a year later, Lucy Letby actually got arrested, and again in 2019, and again finally in 2020. The first two times she was charged with some murders and attacks, but released on bail, and investigations continued. The third time she was denied bail, so she was kept in custody and charged. But now I don't know what the earlier charges were, but she was now charged with 7 murders and 12 attempted murders. The trial only started 2 years later due to COVID, and it lasted 10 months. And at the end of that trial, Lucy was found guilty of 7 murders and 7 attempted murders, and she got 14 full life sentences. Now, the 7 plus 7 is 14, which is less than 7 plus 12. So there were a number of cases where the jury either did not come to a conclusion or concluded that she was not guilty. 1 or 2 of each. I forget the breakdown, but there certainly was there was one attempted murder charge where the jury couldn't come to a conclusion, and the prosecution appealed to retry that single case. It was a bit odd, but this was like before the Lucy herself had an opportunity to appeal against the convictions she had accrued so far. So anyway, prosecution could go on and try some more, and they didn't bring any more evidence actually, but this whole thing that cost another year, which is important, as I'll remark in a moment, as many of you will already know. Well, it's written here already. Yes. Due to the contempt of court possibility, members of Parliament public are not allowed to try to influence jurors, and newspapers are not allowed to try to influence juries of ongoing trials. So basically, the trial had already lasted a year, and now it lasted another year. I mean, there was another year when nothing was happening, but still nobody could talk about the trial, the content of the trial, and then there was another trial, which only took a month. Probably come back to what happened there, but the prosecution managed to nail another death on. Sorry, not another death. Collapse. Sorry. On Lucy Letby. Now Lucy was able not to appeal, but to apply to appeal the first trial for against the results of the first trial, and separately and after that consecutively against the verdict of the second trial. I think that's a bit crazy because they're not really different trials at all. But she had to apply for an appeal against that first one, and after that she could also apply for an appeal against the second verdict of the second trial, which really was pretty much a waste of time. But that was what she could do and what she had to do if she would ever try anything else, because she had to exhaust all legal possibilities before one could go to the next stage, which is the CCRC, which we'll get to in a moment. which we are getting to now, of course. Okay, so Letby applied for an appeal, which means that her lawyers supplied some grounds for an appeal. These are the points where we think a mistake was made, chiefly concerning procedural matters and whether or not certain things were allowed as evidence. But actually, regarding the second trial, the application for an appeal to the second trial, they actually wanted to bring in some new scientific evidence. Let me say right away, the problem with the new scientific evidence was that it turned out that it was scientific knowledge which was known at the time of the earlier trials, hence could have been used by the defense then, but wasn't. Sorry, mate, you don't have a second chance. If your lawyers don't follow up some possibility, it's clearly there, and they may have good reasons for that, or bad reasons, or no reasons. They may be totally unaware. And of course, what do you know about air embolism? The science of air embolism, whatever. If you can't bring it up, no. I think that's ludicrous, because the evidence brought scientific, the sort of new but old, because existing scientific evidence concerning the air embolism destroyed half of the prosecution's claims, half of the indictments. They destroyed their chief expert witness, scientific expert. Totally. The person who the air embolism cases, like half of all of the cases, and this destroys the credibility of the main scientific expert, main medical expert. A bit too much to call him scientific. He indeed himself would agree. He was not a scientist, no. He was a doctor. Yeah. Where are we? Okay, so the applications for an appeal were turned down, and that means it's the end of the road. Except that one could go to the CCRC, which we'll get to in a moment. Not much to say about it, because we're not there yet. At this stage, actually, discussion about the case, serious discussion about the content, the medical and scientific content and the statistical content, finally, during these late stages, started in earnest. Well, it was sort of still suppressed due to the contempt of court for a large extent, but it had already started, and now it became a snowstorm, a tsunami of criticism, and the police, I would say, fought the doubts which were arising by attacking, of course, and they were going to investigate deaths earlier when she was learning to be a nurse at other hospitals, and they were also going to start. They have started investigating the behavior of the management which prevented, well, let me say allegedly, because they couldn't have prevented the doctors from going to the police, but the management allegedly prevented the doctors who had seen that Lucy was killing babies, stopped them from going to the police for a long time, thereby causing many more deaths than otherwise would have been the case. And currently, the Thirlwall inquiry is trying to find out Who is to blame for the fact that Lucy was not stopped earlier? Okay, so now we are where we are now, and Rachel Aviv published in May 2024, so that's before the trial, the main trial finished, published an article in the New Yorker basically destroying the medical evidence for any murders. But nobody in England was allowed to read that article. After all the attempts to appeal had been exhausted, Lucy got a new defense team, and they are now preparing an application to the Criminal Cases Review Committee, for which purpose they essentially will need to have new evidence. And of course, one can argue, lawyers do argue, what is new evidence? Because there is no new evidence in the sense that all the medical notes and medical information what there is now is what there was then. There is no new DNA evidence. There is no new eyewitness evidence. Nothing is changed from a narrow or legalistic point of view, one could say. Though what has certainly changed now is that there now have been found a whole working group of internationally renowned neonatologists, 14 of them, have gone into every single allegation, all the babies considered in the case, and looked at the original medical notes, all the medical information about all those babies, and have discovered that every single one of them who died, the death was natural. All the collapses or incidents are natural. Everything has got an innocent explanation, a very plausible, innocent explanation, though actually it's not completely innocent, because it seems that one of the babies was accidentally killed by Dr. Breary, the consultant who was the first of the doctors to suspect Lucy, and who was the motor behind the doctors going to the police. Okay, now I'm going to move on. It's taking a long time. I might have to split this in two later, or delete the second half and do it again, because I'm getting tired. But let me go through some slides a bit quickly. Let me turn to the three smoking guns, or the triad. There's the data, and for Lucy Letby, this is the statistical evidence. She was always there when the terrible things happened. These are the suspicious. There are 25 suspicious events. And Lucy was there every time, and she's the only one of the nurses who was there every time. These are all the nurses. Okay, no doctors here, no other people working, technicians or whatever, or people who were around. Okay, I don't know whether other people were around a lot or not. There were many doctors at various levels in the hierarchy. The consultants were only there twice a week, unless something urgent cropped up. There were 2 consultant rounds per week. The College of Pediatricians said that should have been 2 per day. The consultants were all pediatricians, and the College of Pediatricians said the hospital urgently needed a neonatologist. Breary, who was responsible for neonatology, but it was only his hobby, he said. He was a pediatrician with neonatology as a hobby, and the Royal College of Pediatricians, I would say notably, insisted that the hospital get a neonatologist, and said that this was one of the things which was one of the major failings. Okay, now there's many things which could be seen if we would have time and inclination. The little blue marks on the side of some of the near the list of babies, label twins and triplets and so on. So there's all kinds of things in there I could talk about for a long time, but I'm not going to do it now. But I just wanted to show it and point out that, of course, and this is just the same as Lucia de Berk, who, why, and when labeled events as suspicious or not, who selected events, who defined events, and who decided whether events were suspicious or not. Well, the long and short of the story is that Dr. Breary really was the one who identified events as suspicious. Well, later he got some help from Dowie Evans, who certainly found more events as suspicious. And the strange thing is that there are only 25 suspicious events in this table, but we now know, and we only found out recently, that Dowie Evans had actually found 10 more suspicious events, and they have vanished. So this police spreadsheet shown to the jurors at first day of the trial and last day of the trial, more or less, and which convinced so many people and was published in the newspapers. This is a fake in all kinds of respects. It's pretty appalling. But the 2x2 tables, the numbers in the Lucia de Berk case, they're equally a fake. Who decided what events were suspicious? Who determined? Who said what was an incident? Yes, I think the next slide, but I think I'm not going to talk about it now because I'm going to try to round off. I'm going to omit a number of parts and only talk through what most interests me at the moment. But this slide says how the spreadsheet truly was compiled, and this was confirmation bias. We suspect this nurse. We look for the bad things the nurse has done. And things become bad things because the nurse was around and because one can come up with some story about them. One can convert what actually seems to have been completely normal events into something suspicious and come up with something very wicked. And let me emphasize in particular, though, that Dowie Evans, who found many suspicious events, and he suspected air embolism, and he thought that the method of causing air embolism was that air had been forced through a feeding tube or possibly directly injected somewhere or something. He had to, I think, a couple of techniques for inducing air embolism. Now, this is a form of attack. Well, of course, you can kill somebody by injecting air into their bloodstream if you put the right amount of air in the right place. Yes, but nobody ever found any injection marks, and this was not how Evans thought it had been done, by injection, but he thought it had been done by a means which actually is physically impossible. It's ludicrous. It's a fantasy. A crackpot idea. It's a crackpot fantasy. But and the reasons why he's thought of air embolism is connected to something which has really got nothing to do with air embolism at all, and that is due to some strange coloration, skin coloration, which was observed on some babies while having, unexpected, unexplained collapses. And this is mentioned in a paper about air embolism of quite a few years before. And Evans discovered this paper, and completely independently, Dr. Jairam had discovered that paper completely independently, and were both thinking air embolism. So the consultants were thinking air embolism, and Evans completely independently came across the same paper, and thought of it too. Yes, so that's that. What about witch hunts? And here I really would like, you should read the essay of Peter Hayes on Substack, and you should watch his presentation. It's just a talk he gave, the same text. Lucy Letby in the Revival of the Witch Hunt. It's a beautiful, beautiful talk. And the thing is that witch hunts are one thing. Witch hunts and witch trials, one should distinguish to some extent these two parts. But the thing is, witches didn't exist. Lucy Letby's crimes didn't exist. Lucia de Berk's crimes didn't exist. Because the crimes didn't exist, there obviously can't be sort of serious evidence for those crimes. Recall Dowie Evans' imaginary crime of causing air embolism by blowing air through a very, very small tube. It's a very difficult thing to do into a baby who's being given air in a intensive care setup situation. It's getting oxygen. The crimes are imaginary. The method of crime is imaginary. You don't see what a witch does, but you prove that they do it. You prove they are a witch by looking at the circumstantial evidence, right? The character evidence, and his list of the techniques used for witches, and for Lucy Letby, and for Lucia de Berk. Well, first of all, of course, they were near to the victim at the time things happened. This is the statistical bit, right? They're always there when bad things happen, so they must be the cause of it. And you can add to this also the fact that when they are not there, the victim gets better, for instance, and that actually occurs a couple of times in the Lucy Letby case, that babies were doing terribly badly at counters of Chester, and there were some collapses which were seen as attacks. But when they were transferred to a good hospital in Liverpool, they rapidly got better, and the attacks never happened anymore. Well, at counters of Chester, they were having sepsis and various infections, and over at Liverpool, where standard of care is what it should be, those antibiotics rapidly killed off the bacteria, if that was what it was, and they got better. But of course, they were also no longer in the vicinity of Lucy Letby. The events which happened were sudden and unexpected. I mean, people suddenly drop dead, babies suddenly die. This happened. This was seen as proof of witchcraft. If you have the witch, because you have somebody you believe is doing it. And this is the signature of healthcare serial killers who are actually innocent, is that there are sudden and unexpected, completely unexpected deaths or collapses which are somehow associated with the witch in question. And of course, witches are very good at killing people at great distance, even using quite mundane things like, chanting and saying hocus pocus things, and sticking pins in a wax model or whatever. Well, I didn't. That's maybe not a mundane medium, but the witches killed their victims of in the time when there were witches, apparently, by using sort of stuff you have in the kitchen, the stuff you have as an old lady who collects herbs in the forest or in the fields. Mundane mediums. So Lucy Letby is allegedly used air, right? What is more abundant than air? Babies were killed using air. They were actually being given air as part of their treatment, of course. They were being kept alive by being on a ventilator. So you use you use air to kill them. That's something which is around. Always, or milk in one Lucy Letby case. The usual remedies just didn't seem to work. Okay, I mean, the illnesses were inexplicable. Repeated collapses couldn't be understood, and the usual things which doctors tried didn't work, of course, and so must have been the witch. Drawing of fine distinctions between apparently similar things in a way which allowed witches and their craft to be separated from the innocent. I mean basically it's the person you suspect of being the witch or the serial killer nurse does simple, ordinary things, but they are given a sinister interpretation. For instance, Lucy Letby stood observing a baby for a few moments, a baby which seemed to be perhaps was having breathing problems, right? And perhaps could just start to breathe again spontaneously. This happens. But there was a baby who was normally breathing and who seemed to be having breathing problems, and she was observed to observe it doing nothing for a few moments. Okay, that's a very mundane thing. And you can interpret it as very sinister. She was just standing there watching the baby die because what had she done? I wish she'd removed the baby breathing tube or something. Now, later we know that the breathing tube was the wrong size, and that was something, and that wasn't Lucy Letby's fault, but the fault of the doctor who had inserted it. And according to Jairam, who witnessed her standing there doing nothing, and it was etched on his memory, and it's the stuff of his nightmares now. He testified that he virtually saw her murdering that baby. Well, yeah, virtually murdering is not the same as actually murdering. But he didn't see Lucy murdering the baby. He didn't see that at all. But he dreamt that it was. He does dream that it was. And he certainly wants it to be a murder. Because he made also some bad mistakes. Right. Then the next method is getting a second opinion who's from somebody who basically has the same opinion already, and you know it. Now, for instance, you have Dowie Evans, looks at the medical notes, writes a report about them, selects cases. He selects cases. He chooses cases from the medical notes, and then he writes up reports about some of them, claiming what Lucy had done, and suggests that the police secure the advice of independent expert Alexandra Bohin, who, like him, also does a lot of legal work. And she does not go back right to the beginning. She doesn't have to, because there's already Dowie Evans' notes, what he has written. So she reads what Dowie Evans has written and sort of unsurprisingly agrees with it. By the way, if she hadn't agreed with it, they could have asked somebody else, because they can do that, and they can do that many times, and the defense need not know who they've been asking, let alone what the ones who were not useful had said. So, exclusion of natural causes. Dowie Evans says babies are simple things. There are only 4 things they can die of, and if it's not 1, 2, 3, or 4, then it must be murder. And then he figures a fantasy murder, and we now have very, very highly qualified neonatologists who have shown that he has missed the obvious natural causes again and again, every time, in fact. Well, then there's the bad character of the suspect, and enough has been, I think let me say a little bit about that, of course. Every tiny little misstep of Lucy is made to be a sign of her terrible character. Any tiny different sort of contradictions between what she says and other witnesses say either may have forgotten or may have faulty memories, but in her case she's lying. When the doctors change their evidence, it's just that their memory is coming back. When Lucy changes what she thought happened, or agrees that what she first thought was not said was maybe wrong, she's a liar. So this is part of her bad character. Many more proofs of bad character are found. And the most shocking of all is the suspect's inability or unwillingness to shed tears at the right time. So Lucy Letby was accused by the Crown prosecutor. He actually said to her, a woman suffering from PTSD and under severe medication, sedative medication, and close to suicidal, who has been persecuted for so many years. He said to her, "Why, Miss Letby, how come you are tearful when we talk about how the difficulties you had in your career, but you never cry when we talk about the babies?" Right? So she cries for the wrong things. It's but of course I would say that many sensible people who observed the case immediately know at such a point that this is nuts. This is even evil. It's sick, and it's I'm afraid, though, that this kind of tricks can work on a board of wise judges just as effectively as on a jury, and we basically know that because in the Lucia de Berk case we have the judges' motivation for their verdicts. We have a long exposition of why, for each case, they came to the conclusion they did, one after the other, and they explain how they come to see that Lucia is utterly evil, and part of it was because she was so evil that you couldn't even see how she'd killed some of the children or old people, and we still don't know what she'd actually done. She was that evil. She was that evil. And she was so evil that many of the experts couldn't see what she'd done. Fortunately, in fact, 5 experts had said that a certain death was natural, but only one, fortunately one was smart enough to see that Lucia had killed that person, which proves what a good expert they were, right? I'm not quite sure where this falls in Peter Hay's lists. Well, maybe it's a new one. It's incredible. Nobody could understand what. Yeah. Nobody could understand how that death had occurred. Well, actually, in the Lucia Letby case, 5 experts could understand how the death occurred, and it was natural. And only the 6th were so clever as to be able to see that the witch had done something awful. Now, so that's a bit about the witchcraft. And the other thing I definitely want to talk about now is why I think that UK criminal prosecution needs reform. There's the contempt of court rules. There's the fact that appeal is not you can't automatically appeal. Of course, you in the Netherlands, generally in the inquisitorial system, you don't have an automatic right of appeal. You have to come with grounds for your appeal. Okay, and they have to be reasonably. They have to be supported by some facts and discussion, so maybe there's not a difference there, but the fact that an application to appeal in the UK, in this kind of case, apparently, can, first of all, it is looked at by the same judge. It's not even a different court. It's the same judge who can look at the grounds and then disagree with them. And then there is no appeal. And if the defense complains about this, then, well, okay, then 3 judges will look. They're probably not going to disagree with the first judge. They're all colleagues of one another. They think the same way. So if the first judge had reasons to reject the grounds, the next 3 will as well. One of those judges was the judge who, had earlier been the prosecution barrister, Casey, in the Sally Clark case, This is the most important thing for me. The fact that in case law is created by rulings of High Court judges. It's not written by not formulated by Parliament. It's created by the people who judge, the judiciary. Now, of course, you could say, yeah, but they're not the jury. The jury decides. But actually, the judges lead the jury enormously. Sorry, everybody knows that. The judge advises the jury what they could or should, both possible, think about what the defense has said and what the prosecution has said. And at the end of the trial, the judge sums up, after the defense and prosecution themselves have summed up their cases, the judge sums up what they've both said and will give very clear indications to the jury what he thinks of, or she thinks about it all. The judge pronounces the punishments and how much jail you're going to get. And at the sentencing, they basically write out why they write out their motivation for guilt. Anyway, what is happening is that judges who actually have play a role in interpreting the law. Judges are supposed to interpret the law, but in the UK they write the law. in the Netherlands, judges interpret the law. And the law was passed by parliament, sorry. And, okay, now some of the rulings of judges during trials, they can then be quoted by later judges. So they become jurisprudence, and some of them can clearly be unfair, unjust, but nobody can change them. Well, of course, future judges could choose to differ from what previous judges have done. Okay, and they will have to give very careful legal arguments for diverting from what was said before. But so in the Lucy Letby case, the judge at the second appeal ruled that the scientific knowledge about air embolism, which totally invalidates half of the convictions, and a whole lot more, since Evans was also very strongly involved in the other half as well, in one way or another. It was known at the time of the initial trial, and so the defense could have used it, and they didn't. So too bad, sucks boo. In my opinion, that's unjust. I do understand that you should not automatically be allowed to have a second chance. But on the other hand, you can have bad luck with the lawyers you have, and they can make unwise choices. And especially, I would say, in a very, very severe case with an extraordinarily severe punishment, it's just plain injustice to not allow that particular item of evidence to be looked at again, as of course David Davis has actually said in Parliament. Yeah, so Parliament is the place where bad laws, bad rulings should be fought, and it really have to be fought. But unfortunately, parliamentarians say we parliamentarians are not allowed to be must not be involved in ongoing cases. So the separation of the powers, trias politica, is used by Parliament and by government not to step in when it is clear that the law as it is at the moment is not fair. It is violating various more fundamental principles than the laws as they are at the moment. There are various, I forget the name, I'm getting too tired. There are various things, bills of rights, from time to time. Parliament has passed laws saying what the basic principles are of the rule of law, like trials should be fair, punishments should be reasonable. That's already in the persons should be judged by jury of their peers. These very basic principles in England, and several of those are principles all over the world. So the jury is a British or Anglo-Saxon innovation, which has its pros and contras. But the right to a fair trial and the right not to receive unduly cruel punishment, unreasonable punishment. These are basic human rights, and they are enshrined in the laws of all countries, including Great Britain. So Parliament can invoke them to have rulings of high court of appeal court judges. I'm not quite sure if there's things in higher. There are higher courts. Still, is there a kind of Supreme Court in the UK? I'm not sure, but the Parliament can step in, even in ongoing cases, when the procedures in that case have violated the fundamental legal principles on which the rule of law in the United Kingdom is based. They can, and I would say they must. Morally, they must. Practically, of course they can. Of course they can. Okay, it can be voted down. They can try. Parliament can try. The governments can propose to Parliament. Government can try. They don't have to hide behind trias politica in order to perpetuate injustice, to prolong injustice. But that is what is going on. Now, the UK judges have enormous powers in determining what is evidence and what is not evidence, or what evidence can be brought to the court. For instance, Judge Goss denied the request of the defence to bring the RCPCH report as evidence. So the court never heard, the jury never heard how shoddy, crappy that unit was. They didn't hear that there weren't enough nurses. They didn't hear that there ought to have been a neonatologist, but there wasn't. They didn't hear that there were only 2 consultant rounds per week when there should have been 2 per day. They didn't hear a host of things which I would say are relevant. Well, of course I would say they're relevant. The defence said they were relevant. Prosecution, I don't know what the prosecution said about this, but Judge Goss chose to focus only on the separate medical cases one by one, and not anything else. So leave out all the background stuff. And this meant, of course, that Judge Goss basically ruled we have to follow Dowie Evans. And the defence, well, many more things to talk about there. I can't do that now. Goss permitted non-unanimous verdicts. Now, an amusing thing, for me, one of the most amusing things, is that at the second trial, where there was just one case being retried, Goss told the jurors that if they trusted in the convictions which had been obtained in the first trial, then it didn't matter that the prosecution had not determined how Lucy Letby had attacked that baby. They didn't have to have any idea how she had done it. The events obviously were unexpected and unexplained. It's presumably is like the only thing that was said again at that trial. And the jurors took only 2 hours to come to their verdict. They were told, basically, we know Lucy Letby is a killer, and so don't worry, and go ahead. What do you think? We don't have to tell you anything else. What do you think now about this one? Yeah. Now, I now have a slide where I argue why I believe Lucy Letby is innocent. And I think I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to cut this down later. So let's see how I stop. It's actually the first of several slides because it starts with a prior, brings in some evidence, posterior odds, updating the odds, bring in some more evidence, do it again. I end up in 1,000,000 to 1 she's innocent. Okay, then I have some slides about the media and the experts. Sorry, there's this one. The experts on the minds of serial killers and true crime. I mean, there's a lot I could say about that if I spent time at this slide. There's some concluding remarks here. The idea of a jury trial is that at the end of the trial, the juries should be convinced the accused is a guilty person. And of course, they have to know this in their guts. And they have to know this in their guts because they observe how the accused stood up to their trial. And it will be as important as the hard evidence. It will, if the hard evidence is not there, but this is, it will be enough. If the hard evidence is there, but this really isn't there, they may have two big doubts. And I think that's right. The complex scientific evidence is not something which a jury can believe because they can follow the scientific arguments. They have to trust the experts, and this comes down to the persona of those experts to some degree, obviously, and the skill of the barristers at apparently undermining experts by making them look silly, or it's character assassination is what's needed. Well, what can be used, and the good experts, the expensive experts, with the experience, they know how to come across as very authoritative and reliable to a jury, and the younger ones who've never been an expert before don't know how to do it yet. They won't do so well. Right. There's a little bit here about really connecting to witch hunts again. So, heart-rending crimes are suspected. Society is scared, panics, is outraged. The authorities must act fast to find the perpetrator and deal with them. Now, if there actually was no crime, we see what happens. We saw what happened in the 17th century in the witch hunts and witch trials, and we see what happens with Lucy Letby and Lucia de Berk. And the people involved are mainly acting out of noble intentions. I mean, the people are shocked. The ordinary people are shocked. The authorities must do something. They know they have to do something, and I suppose many of them are seriously think they're doing the right thing. At the time of the witch trials, there was a whole theory of witches. It was disputed. It was controversial. There were people who said there are no witches, and who pointed out all the fallacies and the way that the witch investigations and witch trials were so flawed that they would always find a witch, even though there was no witch. That's the simple fact of the matter. Okay. There's a little bit of a rant which I could make there again about some of certain experts which are basically witch finder generals. So Dowie Evans was a kind of witch finder general, but there are other witch finder generals, and those are the people who can see the signs, the minute character, behavior quirks which show them that we are here not dealing with a normal person, but with an evil witch, an evil killer. Nowadays we talk about sociopaths and psychopaths. How can you recognize them? Well, it's very difficult, but we have people who are specialized in this, and they can tell you. They will tell you on TV talk shows for a suitable fee. They will explain how you can see the red. What are the red flags? The tiny little things which appear to ordinary people like you and me as innocent, but which they know from, even from statistical research into past cases of persons convicted. They can tell you that this is the red flag. And indeed, the managers and so on should have seen that already, because this is one of the key things. Still a couple more slides. I'm going to go through them very fast just to have looked at them again. The insulin poisoning, yes. Okay, I'm not going to go into the biochemistry and the science of insulin metabolism and the science of measuring insulin in blood and determining insulin poisoning, forensic science. But there are some very odd things about insulin poisoning by nurses in England, because there are 5 of them in jail for life at the present in England. And that means that apparently nurses are 5 times more likely to, sorry, not insulin now, but this is just about serial killer nurses. Apparently serial killer nurses are 10 times more likely to be nurses are 10 times more likely to be serial killers than people of other professions. But in particular, 5 nurses are in jail for murder by using insulin, which is pretty extraordinary. And there are severe problems now, very well known, very well understood, but not yet believed generally, why it's clear that Lucy Letby did not attack 2 babies using insulin. And if her convictions for those attacks are overturned, then that's good news for 4 more nurses, more or less, and some have more chances than others. But it could be a big thing. Yeah, so I wrote some things about insulin there, but I won't talk to them now. Getting close to conclusions. Here's the sort of conclusion. If Lucy's conviction is overturned, possibly 4 other UK serial killer nurses will take a chance of exonerating them, getting themselves exonerated. And either way, anyway, if her conviction is overturned, the consequences are going to be enormous for the police, the CPS, the judiciary, the NHS, the government. There are so, and I would hope also for the media, by the way, the consequences will be enormous. And that is, of course, a reason why it might not happen, because the forces of preventing it from happening will be so great. There's some remarks about my activities here. Here's a useful table produced by Lady Thirlwell, or fourth Lady Thirlwell, where you can see all the deaths which were completely natural deaths, which could not be associated with Lucy Letby at all, though obviously she probably cared for some of those babies some of the time they were at the Countess of Chester. And this destroys the lie of Breary and Jairam that they don't understand, that they can't explain why there are suddenly so many deaths. Of course they know that. First of all, Of course, they know that there were so many deaths, and that half of them, at least, certainly don't have anything to do with Lucy Letby. And half of that many deaths is so many that the idea that they could only have expected 3 is a stupid idea. And they must have known that they, given the kind of patients they were caring for, that they should have expected a huge number, a much bigger number, those 2 years, that 18 months. This is like the easy proof that they lied, I think, or are utterly incompetent, or possibly both. Then here's the very last slide. Yeah, so getting back to this. So why I focus on this in the Lucia de Berk case, because how did the case start? Well, okay, so the case started at the Juliana Children's Hospital, and it started because the chief pediatrician suspected Lucia de Berk. Oh, that's a sign from my body. I shouldn't say this. I shouldn't be talking about this anymore this time of the evening. Could I say? Yeah, the chief pediatrician guided the police investigation, certainly at her hospital. The investigation was later extended to other hospitals where Lucia had previously worked. And a number of the babies which Lucia was supposed to, or children which Lucia was supposed to have killed or harmed at the Juliana Children's Hospital were indeed that particular pediatrician's own patients. And we now know that she actually made a number of mistakes in their treatment. We now know that at the time she was only working half-time under psychiatric treatment for a burnout. Now, the court never heard that, but another thing which the court never heard was they never actually heard from her, because she never took the stand. She was never called as a witness. She was going to be called as a witness, a scientific expert witness, but of course she really is a witness because she was working at the same hospital, and these were her patients, so she should have been, of course, in some sense, a suspect, personal interest from the start. But she never actually appeared in court. She was going to appear in 2004, but the night before, the day when she would make her first ever appearance in court, she scratched her belly put some scratches on her belly with a potato knife. This was not a suicide attempt, but she self-harmed with a potato knife and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where she stayed for a couple of weeks. And so she never actually appeared in court. She got out of it, you could say. This is still not been said by Dutch media. It's not written in books about the case. It's taboo because, of course, it's private medical information, and it's sort of, embarrassing medical information. There's a sort of taboo about psychiatric illness, and it's sort of really odd and very damaging, of course. But it's good that she did that, because that was the point at which her sister-in-law, Mette de Noo, who did hear about that, didn't know that this had happened, until then had been very supportive and concerned about what her poor sister-in-law was going through, because it was so terrible, the events, the alleged events at her hospital. So Mette de Noo was commiserated and understood and was sorry about all that. But at that moment, she put 2 and 2 together and understood that the whole thing could be nothing. And of course, immediately, carefully and confidentially went to various authorities and told them and told them they had to stop the trial. Well, no, tried to get the whole thing stopped. But nobody could do anything anymore. Nobody could do anything anymore. But, okay. Finally it worked out for Lucia. You could say, now I'm going to press the stop